Hi, everybody. We're back again with a new Angel Citadel chat. Um, I'm one of your hosts, Joanne Wallace, the Angel of Angel Citadel. You can catch me at on Twitter as at Joanne Wallace, here on Discord, or on stream. Um, how about you, Josh?
I'm the one, the only Count Zero ASL. You can find me on Twitter at Josh Wallace, and around the internet, various places: Facebook, Discord, here, MeWe. I'm everywhere. So yeah, I have multiple personalities. Let's say.
Yeah, he's everywhere, and I just kind of hang out wherever he's at. So, because I'm cute that way.
You are cute that way.
All right, so tonight we are going to have a discussion. This time we're going to be discussing tailoring your games and your sessions towards your group and your players. I'm not talking about just how much you run. I'm talking about the different we're talking about the different ways you can run different games and what we feel in our opinion is the best way to fit it.
So as you're thinking about um, tailoring your adventures, what we're really talking about is how to think about your group dynamic and the type of game that you're playing and the style of playing. Hey, Fook, how you doing? Um, and setting it up in a way that matches all those pieces together, right? And so the very first thing you need to understand is what genre you're playing. So if you're running one of the old TSR top secret games, right? Where everybody's a spy, running an adventure that has to do with spying all the time is okay because that's kind of where you're at. But if you look at some of the other more common genres like fantasy or cyberpunk or something like that, you have typically a wider breadth of character types that you're going to see, and you have to mix it up a little bit more. And maybe instead of going, turning the volume to 11 on the spy scale, like you would on say a top secret, maybe comparatively in a fantasy setting, you turn the volume down from 11 to a 7 or a 6 on the combat scale, and you turn the negotiations up from a 2 or a 3 to a 5 or a 6, just to sort of level it out so that everybody has the opportunity to shine. um Joanne, what do you think?
I think that what you're having to say is correct. So one of the big things that we wanted to talk about tonight was also tailoring your game to your players. Josh mentioned fantasy and spy games, but we're also talking about players that want to play cyberpunk or sci-fi space, or they want a D20 system, or they want a D6 system. You've got to take all that into account when we're talking about gaming because, yes, you're going to want to run as the DM things that you enjoy running, but you also want to ensure that your players are having fun. This is all about being together in a group, as a group, playing together. We're friends playing together. Even if you haven't really met before, you end up trying to be friends because otherwise you're not going to have fun and your players aren't going to have fun.
That's very true. And with as prolific as role playing has become, you're really left with a lot of different options. If your group comes to you and says, "Okay, I want to play fantasy," well, in the old days, you really had Dungeons and Dragons, and Dungeons and Dragons, and oh yeah, Dungeons and Dragons to choose from. Now you've got D&D, and it's very near cousin Pathfinder, but you've also got stuff like White Hack. You've got Low Fantasy Gaming by Pick a Pocket Press. You can play fantasy with Fate or Cipher. You can go and look at Worlds Without Number by the guy that does Stars Without Number. Kevin Crawford is his name. Uh, Golly, we've got a lot of games. Uh,
Yeah.
there's just a ton of options that you've got, and they've all got different dice mechanics. They've all got different, mildly different feels. Things like D&D is at fifth edition is very high fantasy, high heroism. But if you want to go grittier, low fantasy gaming does that for you. If you want to be super narrative, you've got Fate. Or if you want to get really crazy into the dice mechanics and throwing math at things, you can start looking at a Pathfinder First Edition. And that's just fantasy. You can say the same thing for space. You can say the same thing for cyberpunk. You can say the same thing for a lot of different genres.
Yes, Puke. One of the things that we're going to be talking about is preparing for a different style of game in a larger game. And yes, your question does make sense. Um, Hi, Goblin. It's good to see you.
Howdy, howdy, Goblin.
So we talked about games, and I'm gonna expand a little bit more on this system. When we're talking about different systems, we're not talking about specifics like D&D versus Pathfinder versus Shadowrun. We're talking about dice mechanics when it comes to the system. How many dice do you want to play with?
Or
So,
lack thereof.
or lack thereof. So, for example, D&D and Low Fantasy Gaming both use a D20 dice mechanic. Um, Low Life 2090, which is Pickpocket's version of a cyberpunk game, also uses a D20 dice mechanic. However, Shadowrun, Blades in the Dark use a D6 dice mechanic. So it's going to come. You're welcome, dude. We love you. That's what we're here for, is to help and review. So, yeah. Um, so for example, one of our friends is very much a cyberpunk gamer. He loves the cyberpunk system, specifically Shadowrun. However, he's specifically interested. I'm saying specifically a lot. His big thing is the D6 dice mechanic, which is really awesome. I will state that Shadowrun's dice mechanic is really awesome if you like math. So the way Shadowrun's dice mechanic works, to give you an example, is a you get a dice pool, and you can have anywhere from 5 to 50 dice. Yes. When there's jokes and memes about the bathtub full of D6s, it's referring to Shadowrun.
Okay, perhaps 50 is maybe an exaggeration, but not by a ton. There's an absurd amount of D6s usually.
Whereas with something like Blades in the Dark, which also uses D6s, tend to use a max of 4. We're also going to the other thing about the systems is also whether it's leveled, like D&D, you have level 1, level 2, level 3, but with Shadowrun and Blades in the Dark, there really isn't a lot of leveling. It's buying your abilities with experience points. Cypher takes the mainstream, goes right down the middle. You've got the tiers, which is tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, but you also can use your experience points to buy advantages in tiers, and then you can also buy other stuff like contacts or extra skills. You don't have to just, okay, I'm gonna plow through and tier all the way up. You can do other stuff.
And narratively, if you focus on the way Cypher is supposed to be done, with a focus on the narrative, you actually probably want to do that long term, and that has a tendency to stretch out the game. It also it will also make it a different feel because instead of I guess what I'd call power leveling like a D&D would, okay, where the goal is to kill all the things until you get to the next level, you have a lot more choice of how you customize the kind of character that you're building. Not as much as something, say, like a Shadowrun that's essentially levelless, but in a semi-structured way, if you're coming from a D&D or some other kind of leveled background, Cypher is sort of a half step in that direction of maximum customization, I guess would be a way to put it. And says, okay, yeah, we've got these sort of levels, and they work kind of like levels, but here's this other stuff that you can do too, and there's some advantage to doing that, and stretching out how you level. So
So now to answer Fuchs' question, Fuchs' query. Yes, that's basically doing an adventure inside of a campaign. You can pretty much easily do that with any system. However, you're still tied to the flavor of that game. Like, yes, you can run a heist in a D&D campaign, but you're still playing D&D. It's just a different flavoring versus I'm going to go out and kill all the things or doing a dungeon crawl. Um,
and very much if you look at um, heist as a genre, there are games that do heist better than D&D. Blades in the Dark comes to mind very quickly. As realistically, that's what Blades in the Dark is a heist game. Mike Games just came out with a Kickstarter for another one called The Devil Made Us Do It. And that's another game that's specifically designed around the concept of a heist. um, you can, as Joanne said, you can hack that into some other things. Think of Shadowrun or Low Life 2090. The cyberpunk games tend to do heists fairly well. They fit in fairly easy, and it's often a an adventure theme that uh, you find among campaigns that are done in those kinds of systems. Typically, in a fantasy setting, those are typically one-offs, and usually the campaign or the continuation involves the fallout from the heist, not necessarily the heist itself. So,
so yes, you can fairly easily shoehorn in or even just write in different types of games in a larger scale. It's just going to depend on how much work the DM wants to do. And yes, I have ran a heist game inside of a D&D game. The ending ended up being um the fallout from it. An example of a heist game is in directly in D&D is that if you play the Dragon's Heist, um basically you're stealing dragon eggs. You're stealing stuff from other people. Just about any D&D game can be turned into a heist, and you can have heists, but you're also going to end up having to go back to dealing with what is the fallout, what happens next
the other,
in
sorry.
in further sessions. Whereas in a Blades in the Dark game, you've got your session where you do the heist, and then you have your wrap up at the end of the session, And then when you come back, you're going to do another heist, but there might be complications from the previous heist.
And that ties in really well. The other thing to consider, and this has more to do with system than anything else, is that if you look at D&D, okay, for an example, just because that's the one that you picked, um, the number and types of skills and abilities that um, are useful, I guess would be a good way to say it, on a heist are very few. You're looking at sneak, you're looking at like a perception, search, a spot maybe. All right, and then maybe some of the rogue abilities or something like that. And that's really all there is. And so your game devolves into something like, okay, you're going to sneak past this guard, or you're going to sneak past this observation post here. Roll a d20. You're going to covertly take out this guard, or you're going to disarm this trap. Make a roll, or do this, or do that, and it ends up repeating itself over and over and over again. With games that are specifically designed around the concept of heists, there's a lot more narrative freedom in how you take on different kinds of challenges. And it allows for some really interesting out of the box thinking. For instance, Blades in the Dark, you may be trying to steal a shipment of illicit drugs, okay? And you can do that in a couple ways. You can scout the location and try and break in directly, which is usually the worst idea, or you can attend a party where the buyers are going to be, and then kidnap the buyers and impersonate them, and then go and get the drugs or whatever it is that you're trying to steal from the meat, and hope that the people that you're trying to buy from haven't met those buyers before. You can sabotage the boat. You can just anything that you can think of. It allows a different narrative vector for you to play, and it's designed to do that. Whereas something like a Dungeons and Dragons really kind of struggles with those mechanics.
Yes, folk, you can use creative thinking to use other skills. I have. What I have also found though is that with uh most games, it's also going to come down to the flexibility of your GM. Like if you've got a game master that's very much by the books, by the rules, basically a royal dad English rules lawyer that has taken over as DM, they tend to not have as much flexibility as someone who specializes in improv or in sure, let's see what happens. Kind of like I'm very much a sure, let's see what happens, but the friend that I mentioned before is very much a well, the rules say.
Yeah, that's another key in tailoring adventures is the ability to say, yeah, sure, to your players, and see what happens. That flexibility, that allowing them uh, to maybe come up with solutions that you hadn't prepared is huge. And the more you practice riffing off of those, and the more you practice, um, taking those leads from your players and then spinning a new story, and seeing where that goes off in a different direction, the more fun you're going to have with that kind of a game.
Yes, Goblin, I completely agree with you. However, I will state, while it's all on the GM a lot of times, it's also on the player to come up with those creative uses. If you get a bunch of new players at the table, it's a little harder for them to be more improv and off the wall. But I will state quite happily that my favorite thing to do is to stump Josh and make him make that face.
I mean, she's not wrong.
I'll give you an example. The One of the times that we were playing Star Wars, and you probably heard this story before, but one of the times we were playing Star Wars together with our friend Cosmic, we needed to do a heist. We had to steal some goods from another ship, and then ensure that the other ship wasn't able to leave the planet under the ownership of the people that previously had it. So instead of, trying to move the equipment through a busy spaceport and then blow up the ship, I I decided let's just steal the whole ship.
And here I am running this game, and I had, three, maybe four other options. Hey, Nasser, how you doing? Um, Three, maybe four options of things that I was thinking that they were going to do, and that was absolutely, positively not among them. And so they're like, hey, we'll just steal the ship, and I'm like, all right, I need a minute, guys. Because I had no idea what to do. And um I came up with something. It took me a little bit, but your players tell you they want to do something. I'm very much in the camp, let them try. There's always going to be consequences, and you need to be able to think about um what those consequences are going to be narratively, and play it true. But I am absolutely for a player that wants to go off and try and do something, and challenge themselves conceptually and narratively, because that's, to me, that's where the fun is.
So now, uh, okay, there are no more questions. Sad. Um, I like when you guys give me questions because I'm more interested in talking with you guys than just reading a script or going off the bare bones notes that we have. Because that's what's important to me is trying to give you guys a chance to get more information or get clarification. So we talked about the game, we talked about the system. Now let's talk about group size. Now, if you look at Dungeons and Dragons Raw, rules as written, the CR base mechanic in Dungeons and Dragons is for a team of 4 players. You can squeak by a little bit with less, and you can do really good with more, but it tends to be very focused on 4 players. However, one of the big sticking points is if you've got players that are either all squishy beefcakes. You really need to really need to work on having your characters be uh your NPCs or whatever they're encountering being more focused towards them over just base numbers.
So, for instance, putting together a combat encounter for four wizards, okay, is going to look completely different than putting together a combat encounter for four paladins. Even though there's four players, the challenge rating is not just based on the numbers; it's based on the diversity of class in the party. So, there's a reason that the stereotypical Dungeons and Dragons party is a fighter, a wizard, a cleric, and a rogue. You've got the breadth of skills, you've got the breadth of approaches, and tactics of attack and things like that. And so it's a balanced approach when you're looking at the math behind the monsters, behind those challenge ratings. Conversely, if you're looking at Shadowrun, 3 players, 4 players is almost not enough. You almost want your sweet spot in Shadowrun's probably 5 or 6. But take other games. You can look at Cypher. Cypher does very well with less players. 3 players, even 2 players, in Cypher is not a detriment. Um, the system can be flexible or it cannot be flexible, but you have to understand what it is and what it's not, before you can work on tailoring it to the group that you have.
All right. So your question is how we would exactly, Nasser. Depending on the system, you got to work within the limits. The way I tend to tweak my games to appeal to each player type, I usually address in session 0 to find out specifically what they're wanting, and then I try to do a round robin cycle to where each of them try get some of the spotlight. Like the story monger, I'm assuming is the guy that wants to go and find all the stories. I could be wrong. Um, but if depending on what they want or what they want to experience, that's how I adjust and tweak. I'll often use a timer on my watch or my phone to set how long each person gets to ensure that there isn't somebody just hogging the spotlight all the time, because that's kind of rude. And if I've got people that want to do stuff other than combat, I have combat within a limit and then the other stuff within a limit and try to break it up that way, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And we've talked on our blog some about, continual improvement as a game master and using some outside resources. I want to take a second to recommend a couple. Um, First one is, by Monty Cook himself. The book is Your Best Game Ever. There's a giant section on game mastering that talks about how to deal with some of these particular character types. But even that borrows from an older document, and the older document is written by a guy named Robin Laws. He currently works for Pelgrane Press, but he spent some time at Steve Jackson Games, and it's Robin's Laws of Good Game Mastering. And it talks about, player types. The power gamer, the butt kicker, the tactician. Yeah, they actually called him a butt kicker in the document. The specialist, the method actor, the storyteller, and the casual gamer. It talks about who they are and where they get their emotional capital, from playing, and how to, think about, how to tailor a game to give them that emotional kick. And that's really what you're trying to do as a GM, right? There's a dopamine rush, when you or as a player, when your GM is hitting what it is that you want to do as a player and as a character. And so, as a GM, you want to maximize those hits to all your players, in such a way that they about average out and everybody has a good time. And so he talks about how to think about each of those different types and what they want, and the kinds of perhaps dopamine, uh, hits that each one will uh, get excited about. And it's really, really a good, packet. I think you can get it now on, Drive Through RPG as well. but you should at least be able to get it through Steve Jackson Games.
I sometimes think that those books should actually be titled "How to Be a Better Crack Dealer."
Dude, no kidding. You know, there's half the time I do, I feel like a crack dealer is a hey little kid, the first hit's free. You want some more?
Yeah, that's just because that's in essence what we're doing. We're trying to get them addicted, not just to us, but to the game. Because, like I've mentioned previously, if we don't get them in the game, if we don't get people in the game, then the games are going to die. And that would be very, very sad because a lot of these games have a lot of history to them.
Very much so. And a lot of the games are personal to us, right? You know, they're I said it the last time we had the chat. Gaming's brought me just about everything good that's happened to me in my life. Um, the people that I've met, the places that I've been able to go, the experiences that I've had, the stories that I've been able to tell, both from the emotional highs to the crushing lows. You know, I've had role playing games put me in tears, and that was one of hers. I played a character that I we were playing remote and on voice, and I was in the middle of telling part of this character's story, and I just broke down. I started crying, you know, and role playing games have the power to do that. They can move you like that, and it's fantastic. But if you don't pass that on, if you don't hook the new generation, and if you don't show them that it can be that kind of a powerful experience, it will die.
Any questions? All right. So, since there's no questions yet that I can see,
Here, let me peer down over my glasses at the class here.
all right. So we've covered the game, the system, the group size, group. One of the things that I love about Invisible Sun, I'm gonna take a minute and gush. One of the things that I love about Invisible Sun is that hush you. Uh One of the things that I love about Invisible Sun is the fact that not only do you sit there and you create the character arcs, what your own character wants to do, what you're focused on, what you want to do with your character, but you also end up creating. My camera's being weird. Okay, I don't know why. Um, but you also end up getting together with your group, creating the world around your group, and then creating what's called a group goal. I don't know what the word is.
The desideratum. So yeah, Invisible Sun, you're the second part of character creation, the part that we just did today, actually on our Invisible Sun stream, is focused not on the individual characters but how they tie together, right? So, you know, ignoring the technical issues that we're having at the moment, and just listening to me chat, um, that getting those ideas, those thoughts, those discussions out of the way up front, and having people sit down and figure out, okay, guys, um, you know, how are we going to, as a group, do what we're doing, and how are we, as a group, going to figure out how we interact with this world is a very powerful tool. You know, um, it takes some of the planning and some of the the onus off the GM and it puts it on the players, but it also allows for some really crazy emergent world building. If you get a second, or a few hours, I should say, I would highly recommend going and listening to our earlier stream from this afternoon. It was There's some really cool ideas that came out of that stream, and I'm absolutely going to use them because it doesn't matter that I didn't come up with them; my players did, and that's a good thing. So I want to say it was Goblin Scribe asked for our top three games. Um, okay, top three games. Number one, right now anyway, Invisible Sun. It knocked Numenera out of the top spot, and so now Numenera is number two. And Invisible Sun is just crazy, surreal awesomeness with magic, and I love it. I love the setting. I love the characters. I love the stories that you can tell. I love everything about it. Um, as far as um, Numenera, it's kind of the same thing except science fantasy, right? It was the first game that I played after D&D and Shadowrun that made it to where I examined or re-examined, I should say, how I thought about GMing. And so it's got a real special place in my heart because of that, and it's a blast to run. I enjoy the heck out of it. And then the third one, oh golly, at the moment, I'm gonna say the third one is probably Scum and Villainy. And Scum and Villainy is a Forged in the Dark game based on the rules of Blades in the Dark. And um, it is very much a game that is set something akin to like Star Wars Fantasy Flight Games Edge of the Empire, right? So you're the Han Solos of the world, and you're trying to scrape out a living on the fringes of the empire, on the fringes of civilization. It takes a lot from Firefly. It takes a lot from those Star Wars themes where you're out on the edge of the civilization just trying to live, and very simple, very narrative mechanics, and it's just they're a blast to play. They're very fast to pick up, and very narrative in how they deal with those issues, and allow for a lot of freedom for both the players and the GM. So those, I guess, would be my three favorite games currently. Um, you know,
I've lost.
Crud. Can you guys still hear us, or am I just kind of speaking to the void? I'm guessing very cool means you can still hear us. Okay, so this is weird. I have no idea what happened to camera, but we can still hear you, or you can still hear us. So I'm just gonna keep pontificating here, unless y'all come up with more questions. So we talked a little about group play style, and Robin Laws has that great. Bit, and your best game ever has some stuff, and if you get a chance to play Invisible Sun, Invisible Sun, at the very beginning, has a step in character creation that's not actually about the character, it's about the player. And it asks the question, what kind of play style are you looking to have? Are you a builder? Are you an attainer? You know, what is your outlook? What is your philosophy on this particular game, and how do you want to attack those problems in order to give the GM something to focus their adventure building and their story building efforts, so that they can hit those beats for the players. So there's a few different resources that we have and have used and have seen um, for group play style. Can you drastically change their play style easily? Um, that's a good question. I would say that there are probably some people that can. Um, I don't know. I'm not sure what easily means at this point. Um, I've been playing role playing games for going on 35 years, and can I change my play style easily? It may take me about a half an hour, 45 minutes, maybe an hour to get into a new type of a character. But can I change up how I play? If we're talking about am I attacking problems directly through combat, or am I trying to think subtle and sneaky, or am I trying to, talk my way past things? Yeah, I can change my style pretty quickly. But that's because I've been playing for a very long time. Um, is it is it easy for somebody else to do that? I don't know. Maybe. Um, I would imagine that um, like acting training, or people that have done say classes in the cinema and like acting and plays and things like that, can probably do it faster than some other people. But if you're looking to talk about permanent play style change, I don't know that you want to do that. I think it really depends on what game you're playing, what group you're with, and especially if you're online, the ability to change groups is very ready and very available. I do it all the time now, and every group that I change, I have to learn where I need to fit in with that group, and so I don't know that you necessarily need to change drastically quickly, but the ability um, to manage jumping into a new group and playing a different play style because that's what the group needs, or the ability to when you play a different game that demands a bit of a different play style, to be able to take that on is a very useful skill to develop. And so practicing that is a worthwhile thing to do. I don't know if that answers your question, Fook, but what are our opinions on the hack series of games? White, Black, Red, Macchiato Monsters, and what do you think of others publishing their own hacks? So I have White Hack. I have heard some things about Black Hack. I've never actually played any of them. What I think about others publishing their own hacks is I'm absolutely for it. I am very much I'm very much in the camp of um, publish what you want to play. If if you're playing a homebrew that you enjoy, that um, that brings you happiness, and you're wanting to put in the effort to share that with people, go ahead and publish it. Um, if it doesn't sell, it doesn't sell, but it not publishing it makes it so that nobody will ever have it except you. Now, Fook, when he talks about what, or when you ask what's a hack is taking um, a a standard set of rules. In this case, typically what we're talking about with white hack and black hack are the original Dungeons and Dragons rules, the old basic and oh, the Explorer I think is the second one, and um, adding or changing those rules slightly to emphasize or de-emphasize something. Um, and then taking that rule set that you've changed and publishing it as your own game. And so you can go on Drive Through RPG and you can look up White Hack and you can look up Black Hack and you can look up Macchiato Monsters. And those are all variants of the old basic and expanded rule set of Dungeons and Dragons.
Of course, we will state for lawyer purposes, if you're going to publish it and sell it, make sure you're following the previous iteration of the rules. So if it's released under Creative Commons, you need to follow that. If it's OGL SRD, then you need to follow that. You can't just take somebody else's stuff, slap new stickers on it, and call it yours.
Absolutely.
And I'll give you an example of another game that is hacked and is quite uh of a hack game. When we talk about the game called Blades in the Dark, they've released a lot of their stuff under SRD called Hacked in the Dark, and that allows you to take their rule sets and re-release it with your own flavoring and your own uh design, I guess would be a good way to put it. For example, um one of our friends recently released a game called Court of Blades. Court of Blades is based on Blades in the Dark. However, instead of focusing just on heisting and stealing and being drug lords or whatever, it focuses more on the court intrigue and the romance side of things.
It's
So
very Shakespeare.
yes, very Shakespearean. Somebody else took it and released Scum and Villainy, which is a space version of it. It's basically Star Wars without actually being Star Wars.
And there are several others. And so when you've got an open license like that, take Low Fantasy Gaming is another one that used the open gaming license from Wizards of the Coast for their third edition um, Dungeons and Dragons, and then Steve Grodzinski, or Grodzicki, I should say, modified that and turned it into Low Fantasy Gaming, and then he modified it again and turned it into Low Life 2090, and he released those. And those were based on the original D20 rules that Wizards released, but he's made his own changes, and so you could call that a hack as well.
We ourselves did a hack. Hope's Horizon is in essence a hack on the Cypher system. We took what we liked from the Cypher system and then edited it under the fan use policy and created Hope's Horizon to release um, on drive through.
Lady Merlin will answer any questions you've got.
Exactly. Except for questions about our sex life. We're not going to talk about that. Um, so the way I handle it with when I'm looking at something that's not a narrative theme or a genre that doesn't come naturally, I'll give you an example. Um, I love horror. I love horror movies, but actually running a horror game is hard for me. So what I try to do when I'm looking at the horror genre is I try to read and watch live plays that other people have done, or I try to research a little bit more and figure out what kind of flavoring I need to focus on. Um, I'm also not real good at running the romance, and I think that comes from being one of the very, very few females in the gaming syndrome and dealing with a lot of horny males that didn't like Fade to Black and wanted me to erotica with them, and that's not something I've ever been interested in doing. So, uh, romance comes hard for me. So, but again, I go back to watching like movies or live plays of other people doing it.
So when I think about something like that, um, what I've found is when you when you sit down and talk with your players, um, most of the time, if you dig deep enough, what you'll find is that a genre is expansive enough that you can find something that you find creatively inspiring if you look. There's some tools that you can use to do that, and I'll share one of them that we've used before that's really amazing. Um, Adept Icarus came out with a world building tool called Arium Create, and Arium Create does world building as a collaborative exercise, and the origins of it are like the business presentations where you've got one guy up facilitating with a whiteboard, and you've got other people that are down on the floor and they're brainstorming and things like that. This is very much a timed ideation style of world building, but it's very much a collaborative exercise, and it focuses on using each other's ideas as a springboard to build a world that everybody can get excited about. And so, what I would say when you're looking at a narrative theme or genre that doesn't come naturally for you, or you don't find creatively inspiring, you're probably not going to find something inspiring as a whole. But if you get down to the nitty gritty, what you'll probably find is that there's a piece of that genre that you can find inspiring personally that will still hit the beats for your players. And if you can focus a campaign around that or an adventure around that, it will still be satisfying for you as a GM, as well as for them as players.
Of course, there's also the fact that I'm going to say this, that if it really comes down to it and you're not comfortable with what your players want to play, but you still want to play with your players, pass the buck. Ask somebody else in the group to step up and GM this theme or genre to give you a chance to catch your breath and understand what is happening and what they want to see.
That's another great idea.
I mean, we're supposed to be when you've been playing for a while, it's supposed to be done as a group. And if there's only one person jamming all the time, it does get stale because you can only have so many ideas in your own head. It's always good to shake it up and have somebody else step up, even if it's just a one shot.
Very much so. And anytime. I mean, that's what this time is for. It's we want you to bring questions. We want to field those questions. Because that's kind of what we do. This is one of the ways that we give back. So
I've also found to continue finishing answering your question, I've also found treating it like a writing exercise can help as well. Um, One of the people that I follow almost religiously on Twitter and Facebook commented that when you're writing about something like war or basically anything, you don't take the big picture. You start small and then build out. So, for example, if you're not super keen on the idea of running this super high fantasy game on this massive continent of doom and destruction like Eberron, um, you start small. You pick a city, you pick a street, you pick a building on that street, and you start there, and then you just let it build out. And then over time, as you're building out from there, you'll either find your groove and your comfort zone, or you find yourself being like, okay, maybe I need to step back and let somebody else take the reins on this. And that's okay. I promise you. If you need to step back and say, nah, I'm good, somebody else got to step up, it's okay. You're not failing, you're not quitting. You're accepting the fact that you are human and you have limitations. This is one of the things that I have a really hard time with because DM forever, and then now all of a sudden I'm getting burned out and I need to hand it over, and you have a hard time doing that. You have a hard time letting go because you're constantly told quitters never win. Quitters never win. You're not quitting. You're taking a break. You're taking in some self-care.
that's a good point. And another one, um, to kind of go along with that, especially if what you're doing is online gaming, which is, obviously the way most of us are playing these days, just because of COVID and everything else. Um, if your online group absolutely has to play something that you're not comfortable with, there are the other places that you can go and look for games, and it's almost um, bewildering with the options that you've got now online, to be able to find other players and other games and things that you are comfortable with, to give you that space to breathe. And it doesn't say that you can't go back and play with those players on a different game. It just says, hey, I need to find something to give myself a breath, for um, for that short time that you're playing.
Running heists is hard. I'm not gonna no. Running heists is hard. That's one of the things that I love about with Blades in the Dark and running heists in Blades in the Dark is because you don't necessarily start off with the heist. You start off with them planning, with them thinking about how they're going to make this stuff happen. It's a here's here's what you got to do. How do you want to make it happen? And then during the heist, you get this lovely, wonderful mechanic that makes it so much easier on the GMs, called the flashback, where they can say, "Oh, well, I did bribe the guard before we got here so I could get in." And they I found that really helpful for me to run a heist.
Yeah, I can't recommend Blades in the Dark and that as background reading for heist types of adventures enough. It just they did such a fantastic job with dealing with all the complications and things that make heists a pain in the neck to do. They fixed all those problems and made it narratively work in a very elegant way. I can't talk enough about it.
Yeah, and I'm kind of excited to see what Monica Games does with the Devil Made Me Do It.
Absolutely.
Now, in regards to the players seem to enjoy it, unless they complain, assume that they did. I have noticed that players will be less likely to praise and more likely to complain. Um, it took a lot of work to get actual feedback from my players. It took me, and it's easier to get feedback from players if you try to talk to them individually, because if you've got a game and then you've got this one guy, I'm that one guy. As long as they get to play, they're happy. It's really hard to get feedback because they'll say, "Oh yeah, it was great, it was awesome," and then everybody else will agree because they don't want to rock the boat. But if you draw them to the side and say, "Hey, I did this. I'm concerned about this. How do you feel about it? Do you have any comments? Is there something specific that you really liked? Is there something specific that you really didn't like? Is there something you feel that I could do better?" They'll be more inclined to answer privately than they will publicly. And yes, in a lot of ways, it is like asking a child how their day at school went. "How was school?" "Oh, it was fine."
Fine.
We have teenagers, that's their response until we actually ask them specific questions.
And then they just gape at us.
They're getting better sometimes.
Sometimes.
But yeah, my advice with that is, unless they're complaining and but they're unless they're complaining or they stop showing up, assume that they're having a good time, because if a player's happy, they're just going to show up.
Well, let's face it. When you think about the cross section of players and GMs, more players than GMs that play in this space with us, the vast majority of them are introverts, right? So they don't want to rock the boat anyway. Heck, that's me. So if they don't talk, it's got nothing to do with um, that they don't enjoy it or whatever. It's just, hey, I don't feel comfortable talking. So
Yes, it took me 3 years to get Josh to actually give me proper feedback rather than, "Yeah, it was fun. I had fun. It was awesome."
but that wasn't a lie either. It was very much had fun. Um, but to your point, you're correct in saying that doesn't give you something to work with to improve as a GM or to improve the experience for your players. And that's a fair ask. It's just something that I didn't know how to give without prodding or encouragement or training or whatever you want to call it. I sound like a freaking dog when I say that. With training, here's your treat. Here,
Do you need an M&M?
Cripe. So yeah, hopefully that answered your question. And like I said, we're happy to answer any kinds of questions you want to bring. Yes, they are, Fook. They absolutely are. So we had a little bit more in mind to talk about with tailoring your adventures. The idea that you needed to look at the kinds of characters that your players wanted to play, and make sure that the kinds of things that you did in your campaign and your adventure match the skill set of those players, because nothing is more frustrating than you build a set of wizards and then everything is martial combat from jump all the way up to the big bad evil guy. Why the heck did I build a wizard? Or if you build a bard that is you're expecting to be able to talk everybody through um, whatever issues that you've got, and you've got a whole bunch of magical challenges that you have to pass through. There's really not a whole heck of a lot of point. So as a GM, be very aware of the kinds of characters that your players want to play, and then figure out ways to hit the beats that you want in your story, while doing so in a way that allows them to use the abilities that they want to play in creative and fun ways. So that may include changing up challenges that you had planned from combat to democracy, or diplomacy, to or from stealth to combat, or whatever, right? But if you don't think about the makeup of your party, they're not going to have a fun time. Now, with that being said, it's like we've said before. Everybody at the table has to be having a good time, and that includes you as the GM. But as the person directing the session, as the person directing the story, while you're not responsible, and you shouldn't be doing all of the work, the players should be storytelling with you. You do have a lot more latitude in what types of encounters and what types of stories and what types of um, beats that you hit along the way, because they'll take their initial cue from you. So if you focus on what it is that they want to do, um, you still will have latitude to do the kinds of things that you want to do and that are exciting for you as well.
Of course, in that same token, you're also going to want to try to avoid railroading. Um, Even though it might be tempting to try to force them to stay on track and on task, and um, yeah, you'll want to let them explore and advance at their own pace. It's hard. It can be hard, especially when I've got this great scene in my head and I want them to experience, but they almost never get there. It's harder to do. And it's hard to accept that, they didn't get there because you had this scene and you had this map built and that's part of the reason why I swapped to lists, is because going off script is a thing that will happen and will happen often. And quite often you've got to simply accept it, because it doesn't, your players aren't going to have fun if they're being forced to go a specific direction over and over and over again.
The other thing to think about with that is it's not like you've come up with this idea and the players didn't take that hook, and therefore the idea burns in your memory and turns into smoke and ash and is gone forever. One of the other nifty sources that we have for becoming a better GM is a book that I've been using for a while now, called Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master by Mike Shea. And one of the things that he comments about is the use of index cards for locations and for NPCs and things like that, right? And you come up with a certain amount of interesting locations and interesting NPCs or whatever before every session. So you've got a few people and things that you can pull out of your hat, and have at the ready. And then if you don't use those index cards go back in a card holder or card box or whatever you got, right? That you can then pull out another time. And so all these ideas and things that you've got, don't have to you don't have to look at it like, oh my goodness, they didn't take the hook. What am I going to do? You just recycle it for later. Because as a GM, if you do it right, you're going to have a blast GMing, and you're going to want to do it again. And if you do it again, you're going to have to build stories about something. You'll have all these ideas in your box already that you can riff off of and say, "Oh, I'm going to do a story based off of this now." And this card that I wrote down for this other campaign would fit in perfectly over here.
All right. I think that's all we have for tonight. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like us to answer before we sign off? Because I will happily answer questions. Honest.
The one bad thing about Twitch is that they don't have that thingamajigger at the bottom that says, Goblin Scribe Gaming is typing, or Lady Merlin is typing, or whatever. So you never know whether someone's actually typing or not.
Yeah, that's why I try to give it a few minutes. All right, I am glad you guys enjoyed it. Chase us around the internet. You can find us on angelcitadel.com. On Twitter is at Josh Wallace and at Joanne Wallace, and obviously our Discord channel's up there. And we will be our schedules on Twitch, so we welcome you joining us for our Fireside Chats, our Invisible Sun streams, and our gaming streams. I hope y'all have a good night, and we will talk at y'all later.
Thanks, everyone. All right. If if you've got the opportunity and you want to come and check us out, we're grateful for it. Like and subscribe on Twitch, on YouTube. Um, we're happy to have you on our Discord, and